welcome to night number 3 of the Pipe Classic Qualifier. I am your host, Eli Harrington, here with my co-host, Rajan Tech. Welcome everybody out there. We have got a huge show tonight, including some bombshell news right off the bat. We have got some big news to share with you guys, talking about the voting, talking about the format, and I'm going to let Raj do that. But before I do want to thank again the Burn Gallery team, working extra hard, especially talking to all our competitors and working this out, troubleshooting. So a lot of love to the Burn team and our sponsors, Glass Torch Technologies, Moodmats, really throwing down. The brackets are named after them. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then Glass Alchemy, The Flow, Stoke Smoke Shop. Thanks for the pizzas, y'all. Appreciated that. Glass Vegas, Ropana LLC, namaste. Vermont Cannabis Solutions, Fat Guy Edibles, Upstate Elevator Company, and Willie's Wood. So thank you to our sponsors who make this possible. This thing's evolving, and Raj, let's just come right out and hit them over the head with the big news that we got.
Yeah, well, Eli, really the only way to explain this is kind of to tell a little bit of Pipe Classic history.
Okay.
About the Pipe Classic that almost didn't happen. And what happened, I think it was Pipe Classic 6, maybe 7, and a kiln died. And, Burn Gallery takes fairness very seriously in the Pipe Classic events. And they almost called the whole thing off. People were already in town. People were already getting ready to blow glass.
And this was the whole thing, right? Was that This Pipe Classic, you can't have half the competitors having one kiln, having a functional kiln, half of them not having a kiln.
Exactly.
So what do you do and how do you make sure that it is fair throughout, right?
And Lyons, he came to the rescue. He drove something like 9 hours each way, overnight, went home, got his kiln, packed it in his car, drove it all the way up, and set it up, and saved Pipe Classic. Wow. And this Pipe Classic qualifier came dangerously close to something very similar. And unfortunately, we had a lot of vote juicing. Yeah. And, this is a first pancake. This is an experiment that we're all living through and learning through. And big shout out to Dr. Whitestone. Jeff came out with this great idea. And so what we're going to do...
Well, so let's back up, and I think let's frame this maybe a little bit more, right? Because I had, we got a black couch here, but talk a little bit about behind the scenes. I came in here and said, guys, let's talk about what's been happening, because one of the big challenges with doing this in the first year is this online voting system, right? And so this has been a question is, how are we going to make sure that the vote's legit, that it's not getting hacked, right? We know the Russians are out there trying to interfere with elections, right?
Yeah,
allegedly. Yeah. And all the other people. So, that was kind of a question of how we were going to navigate this with technology and then how we were going to control the human element. So
right.
Take these guys through a little bit of background about what you've been hearing from the competitors and then, like you said, what you and Jeff and the council came up with.
Sure. Well, the nature of this competition is very different than the main Pipe Classic event, which is much more like a Supreme Court justice sort of situation.
This is a perfect time to be making these analogies with the election because everybody's up on this right now.
And, this event is much more like American Idol, where the whole country is it's open to voting. And unfortunately...
The whole world, shout out to our Swedish visitor from our Swedish watcher from last night.
So, in order to restore integrity to the event, and, several competitors, they personally reached out to me, and they expressed that they weren't behind the vote juicing of their own votes.
Right.
Which is just out, And
when we talk about vote juicing, we're talking about basically the idea that you could be there on an incognito or using a VPN, or that you could have maybe one of your friends who's hanging out enjoying some of your functional art, sitting there and refreshing and kind of voting over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's something that we talked about, and I know you guys, considered, but it's something that it became clear it was too big a concern to ignore.
Exactly.
And I really appreciate it's hard as somebody who's been in online media. When do you respond to people? When do you acknowledge? And, the Burn team especially, the policy is always total transparency, talk to everybody, communicate, and exhaust all the options, and then come up with a good scenario to, have the most fair situation possible.
Yeah.
So how are you guys, what was the decision making like, when you guys kind of acknowledge this, and what are we going to do going forward here?
Well, we are going to be calling in the Pipe Classic Council. Now, in order to get into the main Pipe Classic event, in the past, you had to put in a submission, and then the Pipe Classic Council would vote and decide on who actually makes it into the Pipe Classic. So in order to restore integrity to this event, we are going to just turn voting over to the council. Round 3 is going to be decided by the council, and we're going to get a decision hopefully by tonight.
Yep.
And the subsequent rounds will also be decided by the council.
Yep. So we had our popular vote, maybe a little too popular, narrowing us down to these final 8 competitors. And like you said, this Council of the Pipe Classic, again, this qualifier is brand new. Usually, you can't get in. You can't vote your way in. You can't juice your way in. You can't whatever. You got to be chose, as they say. So in order to get chose, usually it's this council of very distinguished, very experienced, you've got artists, you've got people in the business all around. So, like we said, something that I know you guys did not take lightly.
Oh, it was very difficult.
A lot of the people here, and that was kind of the question, right, is how do we keep moving forward and do this in a fair and transparent way?
I mean, there are so many aspects. There's the software aspect where, how do you change that on the fly when it's something that's so inherently hard to build?
Because this was a whole custom system. I mean, this whole bracket thing, this is more legit than, I don't know if you guys have seen any of this other election coverage or tried to Google the election results in your local town. But it's got nothing on the CannaPlanners set up online.
Yeah, and then there was the aspect of, coming from the competitors, these guys put in a ton of work. They've been reaching out to everyone they know for an entire week. They really put themselves out on the line.
Right.
And in order for them and all of us to feel okay and, solid about the decision going forward, this is what had to happen.
And I like that you mentioned that because, integrity is really important, in this. And the artists, a lot of this initiated by the artists saying, hey, I don't want there to be any doubt about me getting into the Pipe Classic.
Exactly.
I don't want there to be any questions about how I got here or the quality or validity of my entry. So I really like the hybrid approach, and I think that there's a way we're going to be able to, tighten it up as we keep doing these things and, simplify and learn from our lessons. But
the first pancake.
But again, I think really important for folks to know that you and the other folks who are involved, who are, the actual council themselves, and the organizers did reach out to the artists.
Yeah.
Reach out to the artists who are still
and
remaining.
I'm not on the council.
Okay, that is an important disclaimer. All right, good. So
I have no skin
this analysis, that's right. This analysis straight up. That's right. Lucasson, that was our Swedish friend. So I think, again, Raj, just really important to tell people this. The big news, just keeping it, a buck, being totally transparent with everybody about how, why, and what we're going to do moving forward.
Yeah.
So let's do the actual fun part.
Yeah, let's get to it.
And get more into this. And now, the bracket breakdown. All right, so we are down to our Elite 8 here, and we have underneath me, you will see that's the Glass Torch Technologies bracket, and underneath Raj, you are going to see the Moodmats bracket that we have left. Now, tonight, we've added another wrinkle to the coverage. Again, we're trying to level this thing up every night, just like the rest of you guys who are still watching and tuning in. So we've actually got some extra technology thanks to the talented CannaPlanners team putting this together. We're actually going to be able to show some of these process videos as we go through. So we're going to have even a little bit more detailed analysis, and instead of just that screenshot that we had, you can actually see these artists doing work in real time, or doing work on these pieces that made it in. So, Raj, let's start right up at the top. Hallie-Cat Glass, we've been looking at this piece matched up against Rich Villa, I'm sorry.
Yes, close, but no cigar. Hey, so let's take a look at Hallie-Cat's video. Now, this I found very fascinating. She's actually using a blow tube as a bridge, presumably in order to create a Jesus seal between 2 points at the top of her recycler. Very clever move there, and I really do appreciate that. For a lot of people who don't know what a Jesus seal is, it's when you have 2 surfaces of glass and you leave a space between them, and then you blow those 2 together until they meet in such a way that the membrane between them grows thinner and thinner and thinner until it pops open inside. And that is a way to attach 2 hollow sections together in a very unique way that's very useful when you're creating something like a recycler.
Yeah, but that precision, like you said, being able to drop it. I assume they call it a Jesus seal because you have to pray when you're doing
I'm not
it,
sure
right?
the exact reason. I think it's just because it's
All
like
right, we'll have to
such
go.
a cool technique.
We'll have to get some insight from the council.
Yeah.
So beautiful piece. We've been watching this with these gorgeous, and we were talking about these being cold worked, right? The other night, these pastorals kind of scenes, and the color in there. And then let's take a look at Rich Villa. Yesterday, you had some really cool insight about unique technique he was doing with the inside. But what are we seeing here?
So here we're seeing him finish the piece, and the last 15 minutes of your Pipe Classic heat are probably the most critical. You know, you've been working for 2 days straight, all your faculties to the absolute max. Maybe you're hungover some Pipe Classic festivities. I don't know.
No.
And, you know, you got very little left in your tank. You're running on fumes. You're listening to the crowd cheer for all your other competitors who are finishing their pieces. Your blood pressure is just rising. And if you mess up that last step, the whole thing is ruined. So here he's taking approach where he's setting the piece down and going in surgery style in order to remove that glass and ream it out. And it's a smart move because he's taking a lot of that weight off his shoulder. He's giving himself an extra hand. And, you know, that's one of the many ways that a competitor can opt to finish out their piece.
Right. And, you know, when we talk about this, one thing that's so interesting we keep coming back to is just kind of this question of choosing between, you know, how you place something when you're working on it. You know, because you're sacrificing that control of having it in your hand versus that strain, right? And you're talking about 6 hours behind a torch. You know, that's a lot. Never mind all the mental stress, you know, that might come with it. So, really cool insight. And I know we've been looking at this matchup and watching it. We really appreciate both these competitors sharing this work with us. Let's go down and look at the next one. Again, we're down to our final four on each side here. So, in the next matchup, this was also on. We've been watching these pieces carefully. This is on our glass torch technology side. Raj, let's tell us a little bit about these pieces and which one do we want to look at first here?
Let's take a look at Terry Sharp.
Okay.
So he's done a similar situation where he's setting the piece down, but this is in order to attach one large section to another. And a lot of times when you're working a large section and you're adding attachments, you know, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And sometimes the smart thing to do is to build that into several large sections and then add those several large sections together.
Right.
And he's doing something unique here where he's working on top of a ceramic pad, which will not allow the glass to stick to it. You can hit it with the flame. It's not going to deteriorate or explode or burn or any of that. I'm not sure if he preheated that or what he did, but it seems like he just went right in. So that's some skills right there.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, the strategy going in, right? And I mean, some of these things, it's like modular. Like you said, you got to build each of these components and then put them together and hope that, you know, you're going to be able to put them together at the right piece. We talked about that piece, the Terry Sharp piece with the networking. That was super interesting, learning about last night. How about this Oak Locoboro piece?
Yeah, let's take a look at his approach here. So now you can see what he did is he's using a finishing tong, which is a tong with a heat-resistant pad wrapped around it, and he's sort of resting that piece on the table and using the angle between that and his torch to support the piece. And it really depends on how you do your mouthpiece. In his case, the mouthpiece is on the end of a organically shaped object as opposed to the end of a tube that maybe you could spin in a circle and get a nice opening for. So he had to kind of take that approach with his.
Well, and like you said, that is a very good point. Shout out to Ben Dabin, one of our past sponsors there. I know he's following Oak. The when we talk about this too, the physicality, right? You know, because these pieces, and you see these artists working on them, and like they're strained, you know, they're stressed, like they're flexing, and like moving that stuff around. It is physically demanding. So, you know, you have to be able to have the stamina to keep working on these things. And again, especially when we're here in the actual Pipe Classic, and you are stressed and you are under time constraint. And who knows what the weather's going to be like in September in Vermont, right? I mean, we've had all different kinds, you know, 40 degrees, 80 degrees, anything in between. So, this is a matchup, again, we've been watching two very different styles here. So I think this is going to be really interesting to see what the judges are looking for. But really, two beautiful pieces. I mean, it goes without saying.
And now that you mentioned the weather, that actually is a factor. Some of the competitors come from the desert. Some of them come from places that are different altitudes. And when they come to Vermont, typically in that month of the year, the humidity is rather high.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're not used to sweating that much in such high humidity or the different oxygen levels.
Well, I was going to say, that I would imagine, when you're talking about these different torches and the way that the flames are even going to work, I'm sure it's pretty similar, but you notice that as a competitor, right? Especially when you're at this master level like all of these folks.
You're so in tune with your tool.
Exactly. So you notice, it's like, when you're in the house, you can feel if the door's open, somewhere else. So, even though it's an inside event, it is true that the climate and the weather is still a factor here. So, let's move over and look at our final four over on the other side. This would be on our Moodmat bracket. And again, we were talking a lot about this. We've been talking about the WinStar piece a lot all week. Let's take a look. Raj, do we want to start with that one?
Sure. Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
So the thing I want you guys to really notice is the look in her eye. That is a highly focused competitor.
Yeah.
She's not even human. That's a force of nature. You don't want to mess with that. The other thing I really noticed that was different about her video is the way she held her piece while she was finishing it. She had it wrapped in sort of a more softer cloth in order to protect all those attachments. And then around that, she had an even higher temp cloth to protect her hands. And she just handled the whole piece around the flame like that. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, well, and like you said, I mean, you look at the detail, you look at the the color, seeing some of those other pieces there. Like you said, the delicate nature of these pieces, it's really interesting to see how well that translates into the actual Pipe Classic. Because again, these time constraints are big. So we do know that some of these competitors, used unlimited time to make these pieces. And some of these competitors were actually working within the Pipe Classic constraints, trying to intentionally train for the stress of that time.
Very true, very true. And at the end of the day, it is glass and glass breaks.
That's right. It's tough. Yeah, so let's look at that let's look at this Jay Howard piece.
Yeah, so the thing I really liked about this moment in his process is that he used the light, the shininess of that particular flame in order to check his piece for structural integrity. He's actually looking through his piece and allowing that light to come through it in order to sense out any cracks, anything he might have missed before he popped that in the kiln.
Right, and I love, like you said, because using the tools that you have at your disposal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all these people have studios that they've set up and, manicured, but to get that level of vision, being able to actually zoom in with that ultra bright torch, just again, there's so many tools and like tricks and techniques, people who are experienced, experience behind a torch are probably looking at this and even just seeing the different setups, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that you're noticing when you're looking at these process videos, even just as far as, where a torch is placed or how high something is? Or...
Oh, sure. And I mean, everybody pulls from different schools of thought. It all depends on, who they learned from. There's many things that I learned when I was just starting out that I still use today, and some things that I've moved on from,
Right.
So as an artist grows and they get better and they use their tools more, those tools start to take shape to that artist and not the other way around.
And you are also, constrained by, you've got materials, you've got costs, you've got equipment. That's part of why I know we're really excited. One of the prizes, these torches that we have as prizes are really, really top of the line here from Glass Torch Technologies. So we understand why the voting was as heated as it was, the online method. Did we want to go ahead and move to our next matchup? Again, this was WinStar and Jay Howard Glass that we had previously. Two pieces that we've talked about a lot here in the bottom of the Moodmats round. Baller Glass and Blossom Glass.
Yeah, let's take a look at Baller's clip. He's showing us a really great example of his flame annealing skills. And this is going to play very heavily into winning a Pipe Classic. If you can't do that, you're almost at a serious disadvantage unless you plan your piece in such a way that every component has enough time to sit in the kiln and you're constantly rotating out. But as you get further along in your piece, there's less components. You've already put them together. So, then you have some downtime. So
Can we look at that again and maybe
Sure.
you explain like what annealing is? Because I perceive it to be you're sort of hardening the outside and shining it up using the torch, right?
So it is as the glass is getting hot and as it's moving and as it starts to resettle, those atoms are lining up in ways that are not structurally sound. And basically what you're doing is evenly heating the glass so those molecules can kind of like loosen out and then realign in a happy format.
Gotcha.
And if you don't, what's going to happen is over time that stress can get larger and larger and larger, and eventually it breaks.
So this is big for, not only the look, but the durability.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you said, it's huge. And that explanation makes a lot of sense. So thank you. I think any of us who have, had a candle and played with a wax, you understand when it starts getting uneven.
Yes, exactly.
And you kind of have to flatten it back out, right? So excellent explanation. And again, we really appreciated learning about dichro last night. That was a big thing we've been talking about with this baller glass piece and a lot of them.
Yeah, and speaking of color, let's take a look at that blossom piece. The thing I really wanted to point out here was her color choice. That plays a big role, and she made sure to go with a theme. She's got this dark to light blue fade and all the different shades in between, and then she threw some high contrast pink with high contrast black attachments over that. And those are the sort of choices that they may not seem so significant in the beginning, but when you look at your piece and it's standing there against everybody else's, you may find yourself wishing, boy, I wish I had a little more contrast.
Well, exactly, and there's science because I'm somebody who's had to learn this working with, literally working with CannaPlanners, when you're making websites or doing graphic design, there's a reason that artists choose different colors, and it's something that's beyond my understanding. But this is why when you actually have people who understand, graphic design, who have this experience, I think some of the personality, I see the pink hair, so we see maybe some of that transferring over, the
she might have
individual
some blue
personality.
in there too.
I wouldn't be shocked, but this is part of what's so interesting about these pieces as like, extensions of the artist too.
Yeah.
But like you said, just the cleanliness of that color and having that palette be so coordinated, I think is really, really, really important insight and good to look at. We have we are down to our final 8.
Yeah.
And we know that the council is going to be discussing. We're going to release the information as soon as possible. And I think we'll probably be putting it out. We're going to let the competitors know first, of course, as far as how we're going to move forward through the brackets. That doesn't mean that we don't want your feedback, though. We do want people to give us feedback, especially on these videos. Let us know which artists, what pieces are speaking to you, what do you like about them, and why. Because we do still have, with social media, a pretty good platform, in which to expose these artists and boost them up and give them some positive feedback. And look, there's numbers on comments as well, so talking about which artists you prefer in a matchup, great way to show support there as we work through. So like we just had Sweet D 711 on there talking about the Plague Mask. I think the Plague Mask is one that has gotten a lot of burn online. We know is super popular. I think with the networking. Before we sign off here, Raj, and thank our sponsors again, I did want to give a big shout out to WCAX.
Oh, yeah.
And thank, we had Scott Fleischman in here, who is the sports reporter. And I thought that was cool. We talked about this. You talked about this, I think, with your monologue about kind of the art and then the competition aspect. And then we had the sports reporter in here the next day. So thank you to WCAX. We appreciate, all the local media who cover the Pipe Classic and who are now covering the Pipe Classic Qualifier. Big shout out to Patty. He repped really hard on the news. I thought he did a great job today, and everybody at the Burn Gallery. So, like we said, thank you again to you, Raj, and to the folks behind the scene, the organizers. Like we said, a lot of consternation talking about these sort of format changes, but this is part of the fun, is learning on the fly.
It is.
And moving through it on the fly. So, we will have our final 4 competitors tomorrow night. That's Friday. And then we are going to have our champions on Saturday. And I don't know if maybe we can show these folks the belt one more time. Because I think we showed them the first day. And we'll show them the belt. As we show them a belt, I do want to thank again Glass Torch Technologies and Moodmats. Yeah, love that. And again, with the rowdy crew that we have, a wrestling belt is really perfect.
Let's show some of the finer points of this belt here. It actually has engraved in it all the competitors in the Pipe Classic Qualifier.
Oh, that's awesome. So that's great. So everybody who competed at all, you are all immortalized in this belt forever. And this we can also see, we talked about Glass Torch Technologies, we talked about Moodmats. They're on here. This thing is beautiful, and it is going to be a definite showpiece and a definite talking point in somebody's shop when we get through this qualifier. But again, we talked about Glass Torch Technologies and Moodmats. Also, big thank you again to Glass Alchemy, to The Flow, to the Stoked Smoke Shop, to Glass Vegas, Ropana LLC, Vermont Cannabis Solutions, Tax and Regulates here, like it or not, talk to those guys. Fat Guy Edibles, Torch Talk, Upstate Elevator Company, and Willie's Wood. So, thank you to all of our sponsors for making this possible. Thank you to all of you sticking with us. Stick with us tomorrow night. We're going to have even more excitement. And we also have tomorrow, Friday, a very special interview with the Marble Slinger. And it's not going to be us who are going to be interviewing, it's Pyroscopic.
Yeah.
Another OG legend of the game. So that's going to be an incredibly high-level discussion. We encourage you to check that out. We're going to be it's going to be live. We're also going to be sharing it online afterwards. So really excited. Again, if you haven't watched Degenerate Art yet, go back and watch it. It's an even better time. Get hyped up for the finals.
Oh, yeah.
We will be back tomorrow night, Friday, with our Pipe Classic semifinals. From all of us here in Burlington, the Burn Gallery, thank you all for joining. Be well.